Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Pick Six Podcast. Sam McKewon along with Tom Shatel and Evan Bland here on a Wednesday. Hello, gentlemen. How are we?
We're doing great. It's cool temperatures. It's football season. I'm ready to go.
It'll be 119 on Saturday when Nebraska holds its second scrimmage. Okay, let's get right into it. I want to remind everybody, though, initially to subscribe to the Omaha World-Herald. It is $1 for 6 months. You get all of the Nebraska football season, all of the Nebraska volleyball season, 2/3 of the Nebraska basketball seasons. You get the first week of Jordy Ball pitching for the Nebraska softball team. You get a little bit of Creighton if you're a Jaysker, and we know that there are Jayskers who listen to this show. Go to www.omaha.com/subscribe to get 6 months of the Omaha World-Herald for $1. All right, let's get into it. So Nebraska football is right in the middle of the dog days of summer. You can tell that it's dragging on them a little bit. The little that we can hear of Matt Rule and his press conferences, to be clear, they're holding the press conferences on a concourse in Memorial Stadium, and it is almost impossible to hear him because they've put it right in front of these giant air conditioning vents. And so, like, the audio that people hear when they watch videos is not what we're hearing. They're getting the multi-box audio. We're getting... So it's not always easy to hear him. But from what we've been able to hear, I think he feels pretty good about the team, but maybe not. Maybe a little frustrated in a couple of areas, and inevitably one of those areas is their pass catchers. Xavier Betts left the team on Saturday. I think he did that for good. Teddy Prohaska is out still, the offensive lineman, and I think Jaden Doss is actually banged up. I'm pretty confident of that. He left practice, the viewing portion of practice that we were able to see on Tuesday. He left early, and I think it's possible that he is banged up as well, which is maybe why Rule didn't mention him right away when we talked about freshman and wide receivers. You'll notice he mentioned Malachi, mentioned Jalen Lloyd.
Right.
I don't know if Jaden Doss, I don't know exactly what his prognosis was, but I did see him leave practice. So we'll see. We'll see exactly what that situation is, but it's a little bit of an issue there. It's a little bit of an issue for Nebraska football for a long time, having enough good receivers who can catch the ball.
It has. I mean, you look at the top, they've actually had some success in the portal with the Samori Toure's and Trey Palmer, who set the receiver record last year. But, yeah, there's not a lot of depth.
Their number one receiver this year is going to be a transfer portal guy, too.
Billy Kemp, is looking good. But, yeah, I mean, Betts kind of felt like he was going to be that second guy. He was the high upside guy that you kind of looked at as to someone who could break out. Isaiah Garcia Castaneda, I mean, he's been on the team. He quit the team last year. He's back.
Because he wasn't playing.
Sure. And
now he's going to be like number 3
didn't
receiver.
feel great about the situation with the coaching staffs. Yeah. But I don't know. I mean, maybe Ty Hahn and Alex Bullock are guys who are going to step in and make plays. But, I get it, like the frustration that there is from some fans when you think about other walk-ons who've played at Nebraska at that position over the years. They have a lot of freshmen. But I will tell you, and we've talked about this, Sam, like I appreciated what Matt Rule did say this week that was like, hey, maybe none of these freshmen play at Minnesota in the opener. Maybe, Malachi Coleman could be a great player at Nebraska, but probably not right away. And there are a lot of examples in Nebraska, recent history of how long it takes receivers to catch on and whatnot. But, like, the line that he said about we can't subcontract out winning to young players,
I love the way that Rule talks
was so good. Because how many years have we talked about this at Nebraska where, man, the team is struggling and they need this, and, man, well, if only this freshman could come in right away and save their bacon. And he's like, no, forget it. These older guys know how to play. I appreciate it. I mean, he simultaneously took pressure off of these new guys coming in while at the same time giving the older guys a vote of confidence and saying, we need you guys right now. I thought that was one of the coolest things he said all camp.
Yeah, I thought the way sometimes that Rule says things, it's not actually a football coach. It's actually something somewhere along the line of like a tech bro and I don't mean that in a bad way. Like, he talks in ways that are applicable to other spheres of business.
Right.
I like that about him. I think that's, of course, if they can run the ball, Tom, and they have an offensive line that they actually like, it may not matter who their receivers are that much.
Well, yeah, there's a lot going on here, but the dilemma or the the juggling act of this first year is you want to win and go to a bowl because you need to. That's why you were brought in. But you also don't. You also want to build. Yep. So how do you do that? And that's why they pay these guys the big money. And I'm really anxious to see how they do that. And he's doing it right now. When he's making that comment, he's already working on that. I'm sure they have a plan. There's no reason to rush anybody. His first years have always been 1 or 2 wins, and I don't think anybody wants that this year. But I don't think anybody's going to be really upset if they don't go to a bowl. Will they be upset? Yeah, but I think if you see the team, I mean, I still contend if they clean up mistakes, they're going to go to a bowl. I still think there's enough there. But to me, this season is about this coaching staff. It's all about this coaching staff. It's not about Jeff Sims or any of that stuff. It's about how they manage Jeff Sims. How do they manage this offense? How does the offense help this defense, which I think will be okay. It's not. You got to be better up front in this league than they are, and so. But I mean, we'll see. But I really think when you talk about the running game, yeah, I think find your strength. That's all about managing this offense in this season, and with a lot of games that could go either way, and that's going to be about turnovers. You don't want to throw the ball when you've got a quarterback who's already got interception issues in the past, and a bunch of receivers who may not know which route to run, or they may go the wrong way in some games.
No, that's the question.
And the ball could go here. You're supposed to be here. Oops, there goes the cornerback down the field. So take that out of Jeff Sims' hands. And if you got running, I think they have running backs. They've got a committee, and the chairman of the board is the quarterback. Now, I don't think he needs to run all the time, but use that as a curveball. Use it as the off-speed pitch. Use that the quarterback run game, and use it in the games. I'm saying games matter; they all matter. But there are certain, you go look at the schedule, and you can see certain games where you don't necessarily have to run the quarterback to win this game. I don't think. Might be some that you do, namely Colorado, or the first one, Minnesota. You just look down the schedule and go, okay, here's where you're going to need a little extra to win this game. So I think managing this offense, but really, this is what Satterfield had promised everybody, right? We're going to run it. We're going to have fullback. They've got tight ends. That goes with it's a classic running offense with tight ends, play action to the tight ends. 94 Colorado game, Brooke Behringer, play action, Eric Alford, wide open, touchdown. Running it to fullback, running it, Lawrence Phillips running it over and over, tight end. A couple times shots down the field. That's what this season to me is going to have to be about if they can run it. If they can't run it, it could be a long year. I think they can. And
they think they can.
I think, but I also think, this is what I'm right for Sunday, it's time for the pipeline to come back on a full-time basis. You don't have to be 94 or 95 every year, but by God, you got to be 96. You got to be 91. You got to be 88. All the other years where they had great offensive lines, just every year you knew what you were going to do. You had continuity. But the way to do that is, the way to be physical is to do it in practice all the time. They haven't done that in over a decade, where they've been physical in practice. They just haven't. Too much backpedaling, too much spread, too much this, too much that. The way to make the offensive line physical is to do it all the time. And so I'm anxious to see if they can do that this year.
Do you think the process has been physical?
Yes.
I do too.
I do. You hear it all the time.
Yeah.
I want to ask you guys something too. You guys have both covered multiple coaching changes at Nebraska. And you mentioned it, Tom, this idea of they want to build for the long term without sacrificing whatever this season could be. Like, are those ideas mutually exclusive? Like, can you envision a way that Nebraska would sacrifice this season to build for the long term versus going all in at the expense of something else?
I don't think you have to, because you've got the transfer portal, so you're not throwing a bunch of freshmen in there, and they're going to run the wrong way. And then by game 5, they figured it out. You don't have to do that. Now, that's kind of what he said this week. You've got guys who have played before. Kemp has played before, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is Sims. So the running backs have played before. Offensive lineman, the center, Scott. I mean, that's a great get for them. It really is. A center is the most important position on the offensive line, and to have a veteran guy who's done it is very important. So, no, you don't have to do that. See, I see this thing. Schedule comes in sections, and after they play Illinois, could they beat Illinois? I don't know. I'm not that smart, but I'm not going to pick it. But could they do it? I don't think Illinois is invincible, and they have to replace their people too. But after Illinois, they have a bye week, and then you go Northwestern, Purdue, at Michigan State, Maryland. That's a 4-game swing after a bye week. You can make a lot of hay there, but you got to go do it. It won't be easy to go to Lansing and win, but you can do it. Can you beat Maryland at home? Again, Maryland's good, but it's home. If Nebraska's any good, that's the one you can win. And then suddenly you're talking about that bowl game. And by that time, the freshmen, he's talking about Coleman, all these guys should be ready. So it sets up well for that. You just got to get through these first 2 weeks. If you go 0-2, I'm anxious to see how the coach responds to us, to the players. You might lose a game. What happens? Is there panic? No, you can't be panic. It's just everybody's wearing a hard hat. You're trying to build. But I'm anxious to see how they respond to any kind of a thing like that. So, yeah, we talked about the first 2 games. Important to, I think, get a split if you're going to go to a bowl. But if you don't, there's a lot of season left, and the mentality has to be, we want to win. We're going to do everything we can to win now, but this is still a overall bigger picture. You have to take the view from the top. Always, everything's fine. Just keep getting better and better. So,
since 2018, Maryland is 3-15 in November. So, 2 of those wins are over Rutgers.
Right.
Nebraska's not much better in November since 2018. However, the point being that that's a game that when you stand back and look at it from August 16th, you're thinking, well, Maryland's a better team. They might actually be a better team. I don't think they're going to beat Nebraska unless Nebraska plays poorly. So the question, I think Tom is right about this, is do you have to sacrifice it? And the reality is, I think it's important to win this year because the schedule lines up that way. If they had the 2021 schedule, I don't know that I would feel that way. I think that's a much harder schedule. But let's not kid ourselves. At Colorado, in Game 2 of the Deion Sanders era, where 60 new players is not at Oklahoma. And let's, so we can be honest about that. And I think we can be also honest that Ohio State is not on the schedule, and there's no other team that's as good as Ohio State that you could have put on that schedule. Michigan State's not going to be an 11-win Michigan State team this year. So I think the schedule lines up that you can win more than 4 games. I think they can win 6 with this schedule. I think they could win 7. I don't think that this is an elite Iowa team. I think they're good. I'll probably pick them to win the Big Ten, but I don't think they're elite. And I don't think Wisconsin, this is anywhere near one of the great Wisconsin
Big Ten
teams.
West.
Yeah, it's just...
Yeah.
So it's not great. So I would say that you don't have to sacrifice a lot in order to do good right now. I don't think they're going to. Back to the point about the walk-on wide receivers, you're always hoping that one of those guys is going to be Todd Peterson, right? He was probably the best of the walk-ons if you go back 20 years. You're like, who is the best walk-on receiver that they've had? And you probably go Todd Peterson right off the bat. The second best one, I don't know. Cade Warner, maybe.
Sure.
But you're also going to have some guys in there that are like Wyatt Lever. Wyatt was fine. I'm not trying to disparage anybody by contrasting them to Todd Peterson. But there's some Wyatt Levers and some Sam Birches, and there's some other guys in there. We don't know what Alex Bullock and Ty Hahn are going to be, but there's been more of those guys than there has been of Todd Peterson.
But it takes a quarterback, and
it does.
Todd Peterson loved him in 2008.
And
but he had Joe Gans. Joe
did.
Gans was one of the more underrated quarterbacks in Nebraska history for that season.
And Todd had Zach Taylor before that.
Exactly, right. But I just feel like he and Swift that year, they just had something going.
They did.
And it didn't happen early. But, everything you said is correct, but I just feel like we can't assume Nebraska's going to win because they don't know how to win. So they have to learn how to win, and that, to me, is what the season's all about, too. It's about the coaching staff dragging this group of guys who don't know how to win with some guys from other programs who have probably won a little bit but not a lot across the finish line 6 times. So, all these things are you say are true, but we can't give Nebraska too much credit because they don't know how to win. They've never done it. So, I just feel like the Iowa game last year, boy, that was a different feel. That team had kind of been building to that. They were ahead of Wisconsin and they blew it late. They lost it late. But Minnesota, they could have had that one. There's so many coulda, shouldas, and then they finally do it. I wonder how much carryover from that with this new staff beating into them. You're good enough. Now go do it. Stop making mistakes. You know how to. This is how you do it. And this red zone thing is another thing, Sam. You wrote about. That's so important. I just love the quotes this year. I was on a Matt Schick's show this morning. The Big Ten. They were telling me what's it been like. I said, well, training camp has been boring, but it's been really interesting because it's so boring. Because all the quotes are about building. Everything they tell us about is about some form of football.
Right.
We've never been so informed about what they're doing. It's wonderful to hear the football talk instead of here. You better watch out. We're going to get you. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. It's all going to be incredible. We don't hear any of that. What we hear is why red zone's important. Why this is on the defense.
Process oriented.
The football talk we get also. So it's been very boring and very basic, but it's been really good in that way.
And the other part that I would add on to that too is I think about the last 2 preseasons, Nebraska at Illinois, Nebraska against Northwestern and Ireland, and I just remember being struck by what the players said at those times, like, got to get some wind in our sails. This is a huge start. We need to build some confidence. And yeah, they're talking about Minnesota now, but it's also like, and Matt Rule said it many times, there are 11 more games after Minnesota on the schedule, and that's just the first one, and it can't be the last. So like there's more of a global feel to things. It's not so up and down, heavy on every single week. And I think what you're seeing with the football talk is it's about the process and not the result. It's not, hey, I hope we win this one. It's these are the things we have to do.
And also, when he talks about Minnesota, I kind of believe him. Maybe I want to believe him, but he gives him credit. It's like, this is grown man football. These guys are good. These guys are going to be ready. We know. Whereas I think in the past, it was just kind of like, it was all kind of like a token nod to, okay, of course, Frost would never give Fleck any credit.
That's right.
So I feel like this is a different thing where, and I'll never compare this to Osborne, but the Nebraska way was always, hey, this is a big game, man. These guys are good. You say that about Iowa, about the lowest team in the Big 8. Oh, God. So, but I feel like it is genuine. I feel like Minnesota can't do it. Nebraska's defensive line better be ready.
Yeah, I for sure, the idea that they're messaging sort of I think they have a good message. I think it lasts 2 games. I think if you lose the first 2 games, you're in a reset the season mode, and you're in a you better win. Like you can't let that thing slide into multiple games after the first 2. If you win the first 2 games, I think you have an opportunity to be a real house on fire. If you win the first 2 and then you win next 2, you play Michigan and you're probably ranked. And it would be an astronomical moment. There is something to be said for proof of success. And I think they're trying really hard to prepare for Minnesota in a way that gives them a chance to win the game. They've had a hard time beating Minnesota in recent years. Last year they started the game the right way, but they didn't finish it the right way. In previous years, they started the game horribly against Minnesota multiple times in 2021, in 2020, in 2019. They started the games as bad as possible. So I think they're really trying to lock in on how they can make success seem normal. And also, they're trying to get the team to think about a 4-quarter structure of how do you win a game so that what you're doing in the first quarter, while important, doesn't necessarily dictate you winning and losing. Those things happen in the fourth quarter. And I think for sure they've tried really hard. I don't know how it's going to go. I think the offense is a real question mark for me. I think Jess Sims is a real question mark for me. He's not a question mark in his athletic ability. He's not a question mark in his ability to make plays. He's a question mark in, is he going to give the ball up 2 times a game? And I think, the best predictor for future behavior is past, and he's done that for 31 and 41 games. It's not a good number.
No.
And so he's going to have to show that he's capable of avoiding those mistakes. But I think the first 2 games are enormously important. Of course they are. And of course they would be if they were playing Northern Illinois and Louisiana Tech. But you can't, there's no easy way to make a bunch of mistakes and beat Minnesota. Whereas you can make a bunch of mistakes and beat Louisiana Tech by 3.
And, and for what it's worth, I think Colorado's not going to be very good in that second game. Louisiana Tech and Northern Illinois, I don't know how much people know about those teams. I mean, they were atrocious defensively last year.
They were.
Nebraska should.
Northern Illinois is going to be a weird team because if their quarterback's back, they can score.
It'd be okay.
Their defense was bad. Louisiana Tech has a quarterback, the Boise State transfer, Hank Bachmeier.
But I think Georgia Southern's better than either of those teams.
I think so. Georgia Southern was not that good. That was a poorly coached game by the defensive staff that day that inexplicably allowed. Anyway, it doesn't make any difference now. But if Bill Bush had been the coordinator for that game, Nebraska wins because the stuff they were trying to do was just too complex for what Georgia Southern was presenting them with.
I guess my point just being they'll be underdogs at Minnesota, but they should be heavy favorites the following 3 games leading up to Michigan. It's a really opportunity.
We just don't know what Deion Sanders can do. I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to discount the guy. I know he's an odder coach. He's different. He's sort of an outlier in the way that he's doing things. He's barely talking to the media up there.
He's got a good staff, though.
He has a really good staff.
But if it was Nick,
it's a top shelf staff. It's great.
But that first game at home, everybody will be kind of hyper for Colorado. And
I mean, if it's Nick Saban with 60 new players coming in, how much can you expect in game 2?
I agree with you, but I mean, Tom's got a point. They got a great play caller.
What are we going to see out of Nebraska? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how they're going to react.
A lot of it depends on how that first game goes. If they win that game at Minnesota, and I'm not saying they can't win it because I think they can. Sure. Minnesota lost to Ball State. I mean, Minnesota plays the game the way that allows you to beat them. They're not going to. They're rarely going to blow you out unless you screw up, and so you can reel Minnesota in. They might win that game 16-13, and all of us would be like, "Oh, they won," and and it might have been ugly as hell. But that Colorado game is a mystery. Even after they play TCU, it's still going to be a mystery. It's possible that Deion's son is a first-round NFL quarterback. We don't know because we don't know how he's going to play relative to the competition, if it's comparable to Jackson State and the SWAC or not. His son, if his son is as good at Colorado as he was at Jackson State, well, his son's going to be a first-round pick because he's really good. But we just don't know. So we don't know what they're up against. I just think those games are, and this is an obvious statement, are super important because the point that Tom makes is really good. You get past that bye week and you look at 4 teams, and I know we don't want to talk about whether a team's beatable or not, but you got 3 home games, and that road game is at a team that does not know what it's going to be. I read preseason stuff, and Mel Tucker just said yesterday, I don't know how we're going to run the ball. He was really honest. He goes, we need to be able to stop the run with a split safety defense. What that means, people, are 2 high safeties. He's like, we can't just bring a safety down in the box and think we're going to stop the run that way. So, in other words, they're not stopping the run in practice. They could be 3-5 by the time they play Nebraska, and he could be on the hot seat. So, there is a chance that this season can really, really get going if they at least split.
But I think you've got to manage, again, I bring that up, manage the first game with Jeff Sims. It's interesting. I drove back, dropped my daughter off at KU last weekend. I'm driving home on I-29 Sunday, got the college sports radio show on, and the 2 hosts, Tom Luganbill and it was Barrett Sally, were talking. Somebody called in on, hey, what do you think about Nebraska? They said, well, we both love Matt Rule. He's going to do great things there. But both of them said, I don't trust Jeff Sims and I don't trust Marcus Satterfield. I think that's going to be a problem. They both said that. And so the national perspective of those, the coordinator and quarterback here are, it's going to be trouble. So, but I think you manage Sims right out of the gate. Don't make him throw it all over the yard in Minnesota. Give him stuff he can complete, get confidence in him, run that ball. I'm not saying go too conservative, but the last thing they need is for him to have a bad game at Minnesota, going to Colorado. Everybody here on his back. You don't know if he throws a couple picks there. It's the last thing you need this the season to start off with him. So, again, I'm talking about managing. Give him something where he can have success early. And, again, I've never seen the guy play a game. He might come out and be absolutely great. But that receiving core is going to need some. They're going to need some work, and it's going to take a while, and it won't be smooth, I don't think. So that's what I'm saying. Manage those first game, and even if you lose, it can't be so ugly that you lose game 2 up here.
Agreed. Okay, we're going to break down the first. This is the first of 2 parts. A part of the side of Nebraska football. So we're going to start with the defense. We'll do the offense and special teams next week, and then I think the week of the game, we will talk more about just the season and the opponent. We'll preview the game. So we'll start with the defense. Nebraska is running a 3-3-5. The 3-3-5 is not a 3-3-5 stack. So it's not 3 linemen, 3 linebackers standing behind them, and then 5 defensive backs arrayed behind them. The 3-3-5 is amorphous. It can move around. As Matt Rule has said, you never see the same front twice. It's dynamic. It's dangerous. It's interesting. It creates big plays. It can also be gashed for big plays because any defense that is as aggressive as Tony White is going to be, a little bit susceptible at times. We will start with this. What's your thoughts on defensive coordinator Tony White? What you've heard from him so far? What you think of him? And what culture he seems to be creating on the defensive side of the ball?
He's fun. I could listen to him talk for half an hour about defensive concepts and players. I think he's fiery. Like a lot of the staff, he's done it elsewhere. What he did at Syracuse was really impressive. And I think we've seen too how that system can work at the highest level. We talked about it a lot with what TCU did against Michigan in the college football playoff, and Michigan comments afterwards, which were, this was a type of defense we hadn't played against before and we weren't ready for. And I think that's one of the most intriguing parts about it to me, is that Nebraska has consciously made this effort to say, we want to do something that opponents have to prepare special for on that side of the ball. So it's not just a 3-4, it's not a 4-3, it's kind of a little bit of everything. And so if that makes your opponents a little bit more confused, a step slower, like that's an edge that they feel like they can take advantage of. And I think too, it's befitting of this idea that you're not always going to have like the perfect amount of linebackers and defensive linemen, right? Like you have your rover, which can kind of be a D lineman linebacker as you want. Or I'm sorry, your jack is that, and then your rover back in the safety and the linebacker sort of hybrid. Like I think that just goes well for Nebraska, because how many times over the years has it just kind of felt like they've been a player or two short, and I think this helps kind of smooth over maybe where those differences might be and could benefit them.
Well, when you look at, I agree that he's a dynamic guy. I think he's trying really hard to incorporate the ideas of the three assistant coaches that he inherited. So for sure that. I think he is trying to learn what he can from Matt Rule. I think Tony White would like to be a head coach one day, and I think there's things that he's learning from Matt Rule that maybe he didn't know previous to now. Yeah. So I think there's an appreciation level there. But he's gonna call some daring stuff, and they tend to use a lot of stunting, and stunts are just defensive line games, people looping around each other. Combinations of linemen and linebackers moving into gaps where you don't think they're going to be, guys slanting, guys looping around. They have a play where the lineman goes to the left and the jackbacker loops around to the right, and it's a run defense. It's not a pass rush. So they do some different things there. I like the scheme. I've watched a number of Syracuse's games now. They do a lot of different things. At times, the defense basically looks like a 4-3 because M.J. Sherman is 250 pounds and he looks like a defensive end. Mm-hmm. Then at other times, it looks like a 3-4. What I'll say it doesn't look like is what Wisconsin and later Nebraska to some degree was running, which is what I would describe as either a 2-4-5 or a 2-5-4. Where Wisconsin was having two defensive linemen in the middle of the field, flanked by what we were calling edge rushers, Caleb Tanner, Garrett Nelson. Nebraska was doing the same thing, where they had a four-man front with two of the guys were edge rushers, two linebackers behind it, a nickel, and then two safeties and two corners. You can call that a 2-4-5. You can call it a 2-5-4. But Eric Chenander was taking some cues from what Wisconsin was doing. They started to blitz the inside linebackers a little bit more. They tried to bring Luke Leimer up the field the way that Wisconsin, Jim Leonard, brought his guys up the field. And so Nebraska's defense had actually morphed into this weird sort of four-man line of scrimmage thing that was really just two men, and you didn't know exactly how to handle it. And Wisconsin was a little bit more effective than Nebraska was. This defense is not that. There's almost always three defensive linemen on the field. And we'll start with the defensive line. On the defensive line, it seems clear to me that Ty Robinson, Nash Hutmaker, and Blaze Gunnarsson are your three starting linemen. I mean, they're the guys that they're first in the line. They seem to be the guys that are kind of leading that group. They're the vocal leaders when I was watching the drills yesterday. And then after that, you have a bunch of question marks, but you've got some talented guys that you like. Cam Lenhart, Ruquan Buckley, who's playing as a nose tackle, A.J. Rollins, Elijah Judy.
Prince Will
Yellen wasn't at practice yesterday, but I think Prince William Yellen is in there. Kai Wallen is more of a jackbacker. Riley Van Poppel looks like a dude. Now, he may not play this year, but I was surprised. I finally watched the defensive line for like 20 minutes yesterday because I think that's an important position. And Riley Van Poppel is Ty Robinson sized. He's not as thick, but he's big. Like, that's going to be a really interesting player to watch. He's way taller than I thought he was going to be. Jason Machachak, on the other hand, is squat. I don't know. They list him at 6'3". I don't think he's 6'3". He's probably about 6'1.5", but he's explosive for his size. Sualefatu is there. He's probably a couple years away. Vincent Carroll Jackson was it strikes me as a year away. I think they're still trying to work on the fluidity of his gait. But that's an interesting group, Evan. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's a group that Nebraska feels better about than most people do. And I think that the players like their position coach. They like him, Terrence Knight.
Sure, yeah, pot roast, man. I mean, he's relatable. He's been in the league. The group, to me, I mean, the reason that people nationally or on the outside aren't high on him is because you haven't seen him do much, right? Like, Ty Robinson's been the only multi-year starter. Nash Hutmacher's had a couple. Elijah Judy got like a dozen snaps with Texas A&M. He was a former 4-star recruit. He's got the upside. I've heard many people talk about Cam Lenhart and what he is able to do. We saw what he could do in the spring game a little bit, but he could be that next edge rushing threat that Nebraska's been craving for a decade. So like, there's a lot of upside, and I loved the class that they brought in. You mentioned McKewon, and they took Vincent Carroll Jackson away from Georgia, if people remember his recruiting process. Riley Van Poppel could have gone to Michigan or TCU. So like, they're getting some dudes. I think that position in a lot of ways is emblematic of kind of the build that Matt Rule's doing at Nebraska at large, which is, hey, there's a lot of upside. You might start to see some of it this year, but really over the course of the next 2-3 years as they continue to build this thing is where that position may go from, kind of questionable high upside sort of spot to maybe more of a position of strength.
At the linebacker spot, again, will they play all three? I don't know. The jack backer is MJ Sherman, Chief Borders, Garrett Snodgrass,
Jamari Butler,
who wasn't in practice yesterday, or we didn't see him there. Jamari Butler,
he's hurt. He's in the yellow jersey. Yep.
So Jamari Butler, those four are probably at jack backer, but I think it's very possible that you're going to see times when it's Nick Henrich, Luke Reimer, and John Bullock on the field. They're going to find a way to get all three of those guys on the field. Henrich has had a great camp. Luke Reimer is going to be maybe the biggest beneficiary of this defense because it's going to allow him to move freely and get into spaces that he hasn't been able to get into before. And then I think Bullock is that fast riser who I think will probably is sort of like a 1B, 2A player who's going to play some. I really like the linebacker coach. I like Rob Dvorak. He's very specific and very detailed and loud. And he's a very specific kind of teacher. He doesn't play too cool for school. He doesn't do that. He's very, very specific in his teaching points. And I appreciate that. In the secondary, that may be the most interesting one. I think we know who the corners are.
Yeah, Hartzog and Newsom. Hill.
And Tommy Hill.
We'll see what
who was
Hill
in the
does.
yellow jersey yesterday.
Yep.
The safety battle, I think, is still ongoing. And that one is between Deshaun Singleton and Marquise Buford.
Who's still working his way back to health.
Still working back.
And Isaac Gifford.
Court Collier. Well, I think Gifford's a rover.
Okay.
And the rover, for people who have not been watching Syracuse's defense or San Diego State, who runs the 3-3-5 as well, the rover is either what you call a third high safety. In other words, he is the guy that is in the middle of the split safeties. And he's way back. He's like either 17 yards back, or that rover can also rotate downward and cover players that are crossing over the middle at like the 10-yard part, or he can be sort of a nickel. So I think Gifford will be playing from 6 to 17 yards off the ball, and he is a rover. I think that's a person who can move around a little bit, whereas I think your safeties are guys that are generally going to stay back, and that being, it could be even Hartzog if Hill keeps coming along at corner, but that's Singleton, that's Collier,
Omar Brown,
Marquise Buford.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you thought about this defense at this moment, and you had to give it a confidence grade from 1 to 10, what would it be?
6, maybe. I think they have interesting people. Like, you don't know who all the starters necessarily are going to be with confidence, but it feels like there's actually depth at most of those spots. I don't know that you could always say that over the years. I mean, certainly, you think about the last couple of years, especially, like, their starters were their starters. And I remember, we would talk about it in the press box even at times, like in those instances when Nebraska could have gone to its backups, whether it was up or down by a lot, it didn't do it. It stubbornly stuck with its starters a lot. And I think you're going to see more line change sort of situations going on with this defense. Maybe that's a nod to depth or building into the future or whatever. But it does seem like they have the pieces. It's still year one with a new scheme. The defensive line remains, unproven. So you still can't rule out the idea of Minnesota just stuffing it down Nebraska's throat in week 1. I still think that's a possibility.
We'll talk about that more then. Yes, this idea that Minnesota will come out in 12 personnel or 22, well, not 22, but 13 personnel and 12 personnel. And what they will say is, we don't really care how these guys move around. We're going to run zone left. Mm-hmm. And you're not going to break through our zone. So we're just going to run outside zone, and you guys can fart around however you want in the middle of the field. We're just running out there. Now, I think Nebraska will have answers for that, but it's also an option that Minnesota has, and we can talk about that. the week of. My confidence level is probably around a 6 as well. I have a higher confidence overall in the performance of the defense, but I think it will be volatile. It'll be good one week, it'll struggle the next week. Whereas I think the offense, I have a pretty good idea of what that's going to be, but I don't know that it'll always be very good. All right, let's move on to conference realignment. Florida State is remaining in the ACC, I think, for now. They had been saber-rattling, even prior to Oregon and Washington moving to the Big Ten. I think Florida State had been rattling the saber to leave. But at the end of the day, there's a TV contract in place, Tom. They have a grant of rights to ESPN and the ACC and through 2036, 2035. And they're not able to move unless somebody pays them a wad of cash to do it.
Yeah, it's a lot of saber rattling. I don't see it happening anytime soon. I don't think. They may try to leave, and then there's always a way when you have lawyers. But that's $120 million. Buyout is it's $120 million, and that's I don't know how they get around that. I think the ESPN and the ACC will dig in, and ultimately the ACC may want to move. They may want to move on from some of these schools that don't want to be there, but by God, they're going to get their money. Where are they going to go? I don't think the Big Ten or SEC wants any part of that kind of a controversy or that kind of a fight. I don't think they want to be part of a lawsuit, or I think they just like to, Florida State, you get free and then we'll talk. I think this is something that happens down the road. It's clearly going to happen at some point. Where do they go and when? There's just a lot of questions. The Big Ten has the money to add them. Does ESPN have the money to add them? I don't know. We don't know. And does the SEC? They have always fit in the SEC, but they've already got Florida, and they don't like to have two from one state. Although at some point, you have to break that rule. And I think Florida State's background, their culture, certainly fits the SEC, the profile. So does Clemson, but that doesn't mean that they can't be in the Big Ten. I just don't think. I think this is going to slow down a little bit. I think the Pac-12 was ripe to fall apart, and the Big 12 helped out there. I'm not sure the ACC is probably ripe to also fall apart, but it's a lot harder to do.
Yeah, one thing I think I wonder about as we kind of work through it is it just about the TV money? Because what is a couple of, I'm not trying to be glib here, $5 to $10 million a year. I know that's not lint, but I feel like there's more at play here. And I think one of the things that's at play is Florida State University has a ton of students. They have something like 35,000 undergrads, which is much larger than Nebraska. I think they have 45,000 students overall. Humongous university. I can't think it's going to be easy for them to remain at 45,000 students year after year after year, recruiting just from the ACC footprint. I know those states are growing, but at the same time, I think you have to be a university that recruits nationally for your students. I'm not even talking about football players. I'm just talking about people who want to attend FSU and Tallahassee. As I thought through Oregon and Washington's decision, I think one of the things that I thought about was, yeah, they're going to make more money. It's not going to be a windfall for Oregon and Washington from an athletic department standpoint. But Oregon just unveiled another banner in New York City today with Bo Nix, and it's Bo Delicious, by the way. And I think Bodacious. Sorry, Bodacious, not Bo Delicious. Bodacious. And they did this with Joey Harrington. Bill Moose did this with Joey Harrington back in, I think, 01 or whatever year it was. Oregon and Washington, by proxy of being in the Big Ten, are going to be able to recruit students from the rest of the country. There's going to be a kid in Iowa that gets to see a lot more Oregon football, not only Oregon football, but University of Oregon advertisements, who's like, I want to go to the University of Oregon. Not a football player, just a kid.
But that's not why they're making this decision.
I think there's a dual threat there. I think that you're securing your financial future by being in the Big Ten for football.
Yes.
I think that helps. But dare I say this, if we went to a super conference, and I don't think you think that's going to happen, but you think there might be 2 conferences, mega conferences, right? One day? The Big Ten and the SEC?
Who knows?
Who knows? But let's say that in theory that day comes. Oregon was going to be in that anyway.
Sure.
They weren't going to be left out of that. So you make the move now, in part because, A, you're going to get a little bit more money, but B, you're going to be exposed on ABC, CBS, and NBC to the rest of the country. You're not your brand, not just the football team, but your entire university brand on those 3 networks versus being on Apple Plus.
I get that, but if you're that convicted about spreading your brand, then you're not showing up to a president's Zoom meeting or changing your mind the night before about your grant of rights. Or like they waffled every which way about this thing right until the end.
I agree.
I think they waffled because the Big Ten didn't want them until they did.
Well, they didn't want him until they did because Fox ponied up more money.
That's right. That's the point. Oregon and Washington wanted in the Big Ten all along. They wanted in the Big Ten.
But they still
They
waffled
couldn't
the night
get
before.
in because the Big Ten wasn't going to let them in.
They're not even thinking about basketball and their other sports, let alone their students. Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm not giving presidents enough credit when they're making their decisions.
I don't think it's I think that it's a nice side benefit, but I don't think that's it at all. I don't think it's about athletic survival. It's about college football survival, and I don't think if there are 2 power conferences, I don't think Oregon was going to be in that at all. I think it's going to be the Big Ten. It's going to be the SEC. I don't see this giant, whatever you want to call it, top division of 40 schools. I don't think Oregon is going to be in that.
Why not?
Because they're Oregon. They're not a brand you have to have. I think TV threw them in there because, they didn't want them going somewhere else.
Okay.
They didn't want them going to the Big 12.
Right.
They were going to go somewhere. So, all right,
I don't know if Washington.
Why didn't they get them last year? They didn't want them last year. Well, why didn't they want them now? Because they were going to end up somewhere else. Right. So
you got them at a discount.
And who knows why TV does. But I'm just saying, I think Florida State's thing is we are a big boy football school. And we belong with the big boy football schools.
Right.
That's what Oklahoma athletic director told me the same thing about Oklahoma. We need to be where the action is. They dominated the Big 12. Well, why are you going to the SEC where you probably aren't going to dominate? We need to be where the action is, and the action is going to be in the SEC and the Big 10. There's going to be 2 places that have all the money and have all the access and all the stuff. And that's Florida State is. If we're going to chase national championships, and that's what we're all about, we can't do it where we're at when we're 30 or 40 million behind, or heck, right now they're almost $50 million a year behind. Indiana, come on. So that's why they're doing. They want to be with one of the 2 big boys, and I guarantee you, so does Clemson. The rest, Miami. I'm not sure that that's a giant player in this. Maybe Carolina, are they going to leave? I don't know. But I just think this is about college football at the highest level. There's going to be a national championship between the top 40. If you aren't in the top 40, you don't win the national championship. You're not even playing for it. So now this is supposedly where we're headed. Again, I think the SEC will always be the SEC. They're not going to be the great distinguished league of gentlemen, football league. They're going to be the great football division, the Fox division, the Fox League. They're going to be the SEC football, and they'll find a way to hold on to that. And that may be an interesting issue. But this is 10 years down the road, I believe. I think this is way down the road. Everything Trump Albert said is going to happen, but I don't think it's happening anytime soon. I think they'll ease into that because it's so hard to picture how it'll all work, who's going to run it. College football has never been able to name one guy to be in charge. They SEC and Big Ten both want to be in charge. Who does all this stuff? The NCAA's backed off. Who's going to run? Well, you don't need enforcement. Nobody cares about enforcement anymore. But who's going to run the league? Who's going to run this super division? Is there a staff? How big is the playoff? Just all these questions. How does it all come together? It may come together, but eventually maybe Fox and ESPN say, maybe we'll just get these 2 leagues and we'll have our own thing. And it can be the Big Ten and SEC, and that's all we need. So I don't know. It's a great podcast conversation.
In 2004-2005, the resident undergraduate population at the University of Oregon was 12,460. That's the highest number. The undergraduate resident population, the out-of-state undergrad population, undergraduate population at Oregon was 3,898. In 2022-2023, the in-state undergrad population was 10,417. That's the in-state undergrad enrollment, 4-year enrollment. The out-of-state was 9,151. It has doubled in size in 15 years, the people of out-of-state residents who attend the University of Oregon. It's not that way with every university, but the University of Oregon is now, and you can look at the color graph here. The gap used to be this wide between in-state and out-of-state, and it's gotten down to here. And the reason it's gotten down to there is because every university is recruiting more out-of-state students. And I think, not everyone, but most, and my sense of it is that your brand as a university is going to go much further on these 3 networks than it ever would. It's sort of hidden behind an Apple streaming service. And while I agree that football is maybe the common denominator there, I think that there is a side benefit for sure. Like, I think this is how you express your brand outward, and you make Oregon is now a national brand.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's why
by proxy of their relationship.
Because they won in the mid 2000s. They were a regional kind of afterthought, right? And then they played Auburn for a national title, and Chip Kelly was there, and they became a national brand.
It's a side benefit, but all the statements coming out of Oregon the last week or so have been about, hey, we're going to get $50 million in a couple of years. They've already figured that out. They've already projected versus how much we're going to make in 2 years. So maybe
do you think they would say that they need more out-of-state students? Do you think they would? I think they would say that. I don't think they would.
That's not what they're doing, Sam. I'm sorry, there's not. And I have to go. I've got an interview. So
all right.
See you, Tom.
Thank you. Let's talk. Let's finish with volleyball. Let's finish with volleyball, and let's talk about this. The red-white scrimmage is on Saturday. There's legitimately things involved in, I don't know, position battles. Like they start their season next week.
Yeah, the setters.
We spent most of their time on the volleyball day in Nebraska, but they start their season next week. There's multiple position battles at play, and they got to play each other. So this is it's a scrimmage, but it's a big deal. What do you think?
Well, yeah, it's always interesting with Nebraska volleyball because there's always so much talent on the roster anyway. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about the setter position. We're talking about some of the outside hitter spots, right? They feel good about their libero. They probably feel good about their DS, generally speaking.
I think so. Setter, the second middle blocker, outside hitter.
Yeah. And, I mean, it's a great spot to be in, right? Because you're bringing in these top-rated national classes anyway. But it'll be interesting. I mean, that's kind of one of the preseason conversations for any volleyball team every year is do you feel good enough about 2 setters that you want to go with that 2-setter system? Do you feel like you have the one star who can rotate all the way around and be a force at the net when they're in the front row too? And just the fact that this competition is extending to this point in camp, to to me would suggest that they have that depth. So maybe they find a way to utilize that as opposed to having, kind of the Kelly Hunter type who's around all 6 rotations.
I think they would love to have a setter who's in all
ideally
6 rotations.
But it's sort of like a quarterback battle. Like if you're having a quarterback battle late into camp, it's kind of what you make of that. Like you want one guy to take the reins, but because one hasn't, you kind of have to, I guess, enjoy the depth that you have there. I think that's sort of what they're experiencing, especially at that setter spot.
The 2 setters there are Kennedy Orr and Bergen Riley. Mm-hmm. One of them is a junior who was the number 1 player in the country as a recruit when she came out. One of them is a true freshman who was not the number 1 player in the country but was the number 1 setter. Up to this point, I think we've seen that one of them is more of a playmaker, that being Orr. She can make some plays that maybe nobody else can make. But Riley maybe has been more dynamic, maybe a little bit more consistent. That's one battle to watch. At the middle blocker spot, Becca Alec is for sure going to be a starter and maybe an All-American. We don't talk a lot about Becca Alec because A, she's not a freshman, B, she's not a junior, and C, she plays a position that at Nebraska hasn't gotten as much attention since Lauren Stivrins left. Mm-hmm. Stivrins was a middle blocker.
Right.
But I think she has a chance to be an All-American. Who's going to be next to her? Well, who's going to be that second middle blocker? Could be Maggie Mendelson. It could be Andy Jackson. So that'll be something for people to watch. At the outside hitter position, if you have one setter, you don't generally play 4 hitters, I suppose. I guess that's the way it works. Mm-hmm. So if Merritt Beeson is on the floor for almost all of the rotations, she is the right side hitter. The outside hitter is between Lindsey Krause, Allie Batenhorst, and Harper Murray. Now somebody's got to back up Merritt Beeson at right side hitter, and that could be Caroline Juravicius. But I think that'll be the thing that we all watch, and it could be somebody else too. But that'll be the thing that we're watching a little bit is, does Harper Murray, who's a true freshman,
top recruit,
blast her way into playing time?
She looked good at the spring scrimmages that they had, like really good. So yeah, maybe and like I feel like the conversation that we had earlier about how much do you build for the future versus what you have now, I feel like that conversation applies a lot more to the volleyball team than it does with what Matt Rule's doing in year one. Because to your point, I mean, if you have a star freshman setter, does that person give you the best opportunity to win this month? Certainly they do in 2 years. If you bank that experience now, you're going to be better in 2 years. How do you balance that with winning right now? And I think that's always an interesting conversation when you bring in a freshman class as dynamic as the one Nebraska did, is how much do those players jump in right away? You see that a lot more in college volleyball than you do in football, for example. How much do they jump in right away versus leaning more on some older players who maybe haven't been stars necessarily in their own rights as Nebraska would view them, but have been solid players as well.
Will be interesting to see what happens this weekend. I don't know that. The other thing is you can take all of these competitions basically into the second weekend, because they're going to play some teams their first weekend that they're going to beat. Then they're going to play UNO in the volleyball day. And I suspect everybody's going to play that night. Like they're not going to just hold people back. They're going to do all kinds of things there. And then you got to kind of decide, because they have 3 big non-conference matches: Creighton, Kentucky, and Stanford. Mm-hmm. And I think the feeling is they've got to win at least 2 of those to feel really good about having what amounts to a regional seed.
And you think this is a Final Four team?
Oh yeah, I do. I think the chemistry and the culture is always good. I think the chemistry's better. I think, and I think I've talked about this before, and I could be wrong. I'm often wrong. I think the chemistry with this group is just going to be a little bit better than it was last year. Not because they had bad chemistry, but you had a lot of seniors last year. You had one senior who I don't really think thought they were going to be playing as much as they did in the role that they did, that being Nicklin Hames. You had another senior who got banged up, obviously, in Kenzie. And then you had Maddie Kubik, who, was, I think, ready to roll and had a really strong season. But it's notable to me that both she and Knuckles had no intention of coming back. And Knuckles, I think, announced that prior to getting hurt.
I believe that's right.
And I think it's because, hey, we're full at scholarships, and we're not looking for walk-ons. We don't need more people around to compete. I think those seniors, it was kind of obviously about their senior years. It was the number one team in the country. I think there was a little pressure there that they felt. They lost one of their best defensive players, and the setter situation did not resolve itself, right? And Stivrins was gone. Stivrins wasn't there. And so I think the last 2 years had taken a lot out of them, because they had the 2021 and then the 2021 fall season. I just think there was a level of exhaustion around the program that's not there now. I think these freshmen have come in. I think they've been a breath of fresh air. And I also think their personalities have been very propulsive. They're outgoing, they're extroverted, and I think Nebraska, I think they finally have I think they feel like they have leaders. They're young, but they have leaders. I mean, the captains this year are Alexi Rodriguez, the defensive specialist, and Merritt Beeson, who just got there. I think in 2 years' time, they'll have 4 captains. Does that make sense?
It does.
Because I think that's the kind of players they have down there. So, yeah, I think it's the kind of team that's going to peak late and is not going to be afraid of anything.
Sounds like a standard Nebraska volleyball team.
All right, that's our podcast for this week. For Evan and Tom, I'm Sam, and thanks for listening.